got to give you this information about Ukraine hitting Russia. Inside the news notes, everybody, is a really, really sad and troubling story, and it's got very large implications. Ukraine just hit a Russian dormitory, killing at least 6 people, injuring 39. This was a 3-phase, 16 rocket/drone strike that leaves survivors struggling to stay alive in the rubble as rescuers try to get to them. This development, as well as recent Ukraine drone flights over Estonia and into Finland, indicate a thirst on the part of Zelensky to draw Russia to hit European interests. Those would be European interests who are supplying weapons and intel and more. This is a tragic attack. It is a war crime, and it will push Europe and Russia closer to war. Now, before we go over and read the headline from RT, I also want to mention this. This popped into my mind, and you'll see this on the RT report. The hit comes literally less than 2 days after Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping came up with very profound, massively centuries-making historical agreements between Russia and China. And this almost seems like it's an in-your-face attack to try to, again, generate some sort of tumult as Russia and China start off on these great endeavors with the pipeline and things like that, again, to try to draw Europe into this. We've already got the tendency for people like folks like von der Leyen and others to try to reorient their economies towards a wartime footing, just like Donald Trump wants auto manufacturers to start making weapons. This is a really, really poisonous sign. Now, inside the news notes, I've got about 20 minutes of this that we recorded, we rendered, and we embedded inside. We're going to get to that in a minute, but I want to show you this because you'll see here that there are people who are sounding the alarm about this. You'll see, of course, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Prime Minister Robert Fico, is saying potential UAV provocations could spark a wider conflict, the Slovak Prime Minister has warned. Ukrainian drone flyovers over NATO members' territory could lead to uncontrollable military escalation if Western leaders continue to refuse direct dialogue with Russia, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has warned. Since mid-March, Ukrainian long-range drones have repeatedly crossed Baltic and Nordic airspace, with several NATO states reporting UAV crashes on their territory. And what has been the response from the head of NATO, the former head, of course, leader of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte? Instead of saying, hey, Ukraine, why don't you sue for peace rather than continuing this and now threatening people in places like the Nordic airspace in Finland? How about stopping that? No, instead it's we'll continue supplying you with weapons. And now, since you don't seem to know how to fly them, Rutte's idea is we will give you technological assistance to fly them. I mean, how much more direct conflict could you get? They've wanted an EU army. They've got NATO. Now NATO literally has its leader saying, hey, you know what? We'll ship some guys over to do the joysticks for you. Because evidently you don't know how to run the weapons we're giving you. So we'll run them for you. How is that not NATO now attacking Russia? The latest major incident occurred in Latvia, where failure to intercept 2 drones that hit an oil storage facility on May 7th triggered the defense minister of Latvia's resignation and led to the collapse of Prime Minister Ivica Salina's government. And she was very apologetic. She says, I have to resign. I didn't do a good job for you. Speaking at a press conference on Thursday, Robert Fico of Slovakia suggested that Ukrainian drone operations could trigger a wider conflict. Quote, I am incredibly afraid of some provocation that may trigger a mechanism that will then be unstoppable, he said. if drones start flying over the heads of NATO member states, and those drones are mostly Ukrainian, that's a serious problem. Now, let me show you what's embedded inside the news notes, because I think this might be something memorable for you. As I noted here, as part of this special news notes release, I have decided to throw the reins to RT. Please watch this excellent coverage and note how it ties into the U.S. attack on the school in Minab, Iran.
The stove crushed my feet.
A student wounded in a Ukrainian drone strike speaks about how she was rescued by responders who heard her screams from under the rubble. At least 6 people were killed and 39 wounded in the attack.
One of the craters left here for a sense of scale. I'm going to get inside. It's 2 meters high.
RT reports from the scene of that attack at a school dormitory in Russia's Lugansk Republic. Also ahead.
It is impossible to limit ourselves to statements from the foreign ministry. Therefore, the Russian Defense Ministry has been ordered to present its proposals.
Vladimir Putin requests that the Russian Defense Ministry prepare a response. He says Kiev's strike was conducted in 3 waves with a total of 16 drones targeting the same location.
Okay, now as we go to the theme music, everybody, I do want to keep in mind, now that I've used some of this on my tongue, I do want to keep in mind that, we see so many of these reports, and I don't want to sound like apologetic or anything like that. But, one can become numb or acclimated to some of these reports. I just want to stress how bad this is. This is really, really bad. Like, this is one of the worst events in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict since 2022. This is major league bad. So I have to stress this. This cannot historically be overlooked.
And Russia has requested an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council following the Ukrainian attack. Moscow says the strike, which targeted a school, was a war crime.
I want to say that we immediately prepared the necessary requests. The necessary requests are also addressed to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Human Rights Council, and of course the OSCE. These events cannot be described as anything other than war crimes.
It's time for the news on RT International. My name is Igor Piskunov, live from Moscow. Welcome to the program. And we begin with breaking news. At least 6 people were killed and 39 wounded in a Ukrainian drone attack on a school dormitory in the Lugansk Republic. There were 3 waves of strikes with a total of 16 UAVs. An injured student spoke about being rescued from the rubble.
I had shrapnel in the back of my head, in my neck. They were taken out. Also, the stove crushed my feet. I had gone to bed. Girls woke me up. They said the siren went off again. We started running out, and then the strike hit. I was covered by the stove, and the girls couldn't get me out. I regained consciousness after a while and started calling for help. People started to clean up the rubble. They heard my screams and rescued me.
Earlier, the rescue operation was suspended due to a threat of a repeat attack, and now emergency services are back working at the scene. That says 15 families still wait for first responders to find their loved ones. Local authorities are providing relief efforts and even psychological assistance to the relatives of those directly affected. Vladimir Putin says Kiev deliberately targeted civilians.
I emphasize that there are no military facilities or special service facilities near the dormitory. Therefore, there is no basis to claim that the projectile struck the building as a result of our air defense or electronic warfare systems. No one can say that there was an attempt to strike some target and that the drones were shot down by our own means and then accidentally hit this building. The strike was not accidental. It occurred in 3 waves, 16 drones targeting the same location. But it is clear to us, and once again, it becomes obvious who we are dealing with.
Ukrainian drones took aim at the main academic building as well as the dormitory of the college. And our senior correspondent Murat Gazdiev brought us the latest details from the ground.
Well, it's bad. It isn't good. We've just come from about 50 meters away. There's a walled-off tennis court or a football field, and the relatives of the kids still trapped under the rubble. The kids that are missing under the rubble, they're there with rescuers, with psychiatric help. They're in a bad shape. They're in a very bad shape. There's hysteria, there's shouting, there's shock. There are mothers, fathers sitting there waiting to hear on news the fate of their sons, of their daughters trapped under tons of rubble just a few buildings away. But this is the campus. This is the main building, an academic building of the Starobelsk College, Pedagogy College. These kids were learning to become teachers, junior teachers, kindergarten teachers. And, you know, the longer we spend here, the more there is a sense that this simply wasn't an accident. I want to show you a piece of shrapnel we found, but first, according to official information, this was published, investigators here, they're everywhere. They've identified the wreckage of at least 4 long-range attack suicide drones launched by Ukraine on this building and the dormitory next door. We'll show you that in a second. But this, for example, is a piece of shrapnel. It's everywhere here. This isn't from an unmanned aerial vehicle. This is either a big rocket, a missile, or even more likely a glide bomb dropped or launched by an airplane. This is one of the craters left here for a sense of scale. I'm going to get inside. It's 2 meters high, at least 2 meters high. Now, why I note this sort of firepower, a combined strike using whatever caused this, a glide bomb or a missile, as well as long-range drones. This is what is called a combined strike, combined arms strike, so various different munitions. And usually, or always, these sorts of attacks happen after thorough reconnaissance. So it couldn't have been an accident. You can't accidentally launch the amount of firepower that was launched at this, at a university and a dormitory, without knowing what you're going to hit. Now, just around the corner, we have to be careful. There have been repeated air alerts, so Ukrainian drones continue to circle nearby, continue to try to get closer, and there's serious danger, fear here that there could be a double tap attack, so there could be a second strike on the survivors and the rescuers. The rescuers are hard at work here. This is the dormitory. This is where anywhere from 10 to 18 children are currently trapped. Now, the scenes inside there are horrendous as well. There are several bodies that rescuers have found, minors, all of the minors under 18. The rescuers have found they can't get them out for now without risking another collapse. So certainly they're hard at work trying to find those bodies. The relatives, again, there's no words to describe. These kids as young as 14, they were studying to be teachers. Teachers for kindergarten, for junior classes. A philosophy textbook or a philosophy class belonged to one of the students. Homework. All of this happening with imminent threat of another attack by Ukraine.
Moscow says such strikes are usually carried out with the help from NATO, as member nations provide Kiev with intelligence and targeting information In light of the tragedy, Vladimir Putin addressed Ukrainian troops directly, highlighting Kiev carries out such crimes to divert attention from its troubles, including its failures across the front, and has ordered the defense ministry to prepare a response.
I want to once again address the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine in this regard. Do not carry out the criminal orders of this illegitimate, corrupt junta. Otherwise, you yourselves become accomplices in these crimes. Although the reasons for such criminal behavior by the Kiev regime are clear, these are constant failures at the front, the loss of positions. The situation at the front for the Ukrainian armed forces is gradually turning from difficult and critical to catastrophic. Even the Western aid, which is regularly embezzled, does not help. The Kiev regime certainly needs such crimes to divert attention from what is happening both at the front and within the country, and to provoke a reaction from Russia. The Russian Foreign Ministry has been tasked with informing international organizations and the international community about this crime. You and I understand that in such cases, it is impossible to limit ourselves to statements from the Foreign Ministry. Therefore, the Russian Defense Ministry has been ordered to present its proposals.
Russia has called for an emergency meeting to be held at the UN Security Council after the Ukrainian attack, and is scheduled to convene at 1900 GMT, which is just less than 2 hours from now. That says all necessary requests have been sent to the UN, the OSCE, and other human rights organizations. The Russian Human Rights Commissioner says what happened is a war crime.
I want to say that we immediately prepared the necessary requests. The necessary requests are also addressed to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Human Rights Council, and of course the OSCE. And we are awaiting the reaction of the international community. We expect this reaction because under humanitarian law, these events cannot be described as anything other than war crimes. Therefore, we are in constant contact with those who have contacted us. They will receive the necessary assistance, and we will keep the situation under control. And we are still hoping for a response from the international community because this cannot be described as anything other than a war crime.
I want to pause there just because for a couple of reasons. First, again, in going through this afternoon and working on this and making decisions about the editorial side of things, I knew that this coverage is really important. And this event in Russia, if this isn't played right, this is like we're talking Franz Ferdinand level path, this attack. And it's going to be up to Putin to resist what people want Putin to do, which is to strike Europeans, because the Europeans clearly assisted this. That vassal Zelensky, that little ant Zelensky, has been their plaything and the United States plaything for a long, long time. And I don't think that a lot of Westerners are comfortable with the thought, at least if they're pro-Zionists, of what it might be like if, say, for example, this were done to an Israeli-based, Zionist-based, occupation-based school, the way the Americans hit an Iranian school. If this were done inside Tel Aviv, perhaps, with, say, for example, weapons provided by, Canada, what would the relationship then be, right? And these are all these little tiny states in Europe, and this is going to be a big, big problem.
We heard from former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer Scott Ritter. He said the Ukraine was fully aware that it was striking a school dormitory. He explains that before any attack, intelligence is collected to determine the target.
You're speaking to somebody who has been a targeting officer and a battle damage assessment officer during wartime. So I know exactly what it takes to put together a target package, to gather the intelligence, to determine what munitions are going to be struck, why you're using these munitions, what the nature of the target is, what effect you want on the target. They struck a school dormitory. Now, is this a matter of bad intelligence? That this used to be a military barracks recently converted? No, it's a school dormitory. They knew it was a school dormitory, and they struck it for the purpose of terrorizing, murdering, killing the people inside there, and by doing so, striking fear and terror into the hearts of the citizens at large in the Lugansk People's Republic. Well, first of all, NATO is culpable for everything that Ukraine does, because NATO and the United States have been providing the intelligence, the weapons, the manufacturing capacity, the training that allows Ukraine to do what they're doing today. The Ukrainian drone operation only exists because of the assistance provided by the West. This is not a Ukrainian operation. Ukraine has long been recognized as nothing more than a proxy of the collective West and their overall strategic objectives of defeating Russia. This was an act of terror perpetrated by NATO, by the United States, using the Ukrainian proxy, and it must be treated this way or else it will never stop.
Russia's foreign ministry has described the attack, which targeted children, as an act of terrorism, adding that Kiev's sponsors turn a blind eye to those deplorable tactics.
The Kiev regime operates from the position of a terrorist cell, a cell with an international component, as it is funded from abroad. We are talking about sponsorship by countries of the Western minority that provide arms, financial, and political support. Kiev's ideology is absolutely neo-Nazi, based on segregation along national, linguistic, and cultural lines. But they target the most vulnerable categories, children of all ages, literally from toddlers to school children, and from school children to teenagers. This logic is animalistic, although probably few animals would choose to target children. It is hard to recall anything like this happening in the civilized world. The only comparable period in modern history is the years of the World War II. During the era of Nazism and fascism, it was children who were killed and experimented upon. They were killed, tortured in concentration camps. Sometimes they were killed for no reason at all, solely on the basis of nationality. The same absolute dehumanization is happening now, as the Kiev regime is deliberately killing children.
Let's cross live now to...
All right, and more incredibly insightful coverage coming up in just a minute. But just to lay down some thoughts to you here, I mentioned that there's a lot of pressure, as you probably know, if you watch, The Judge, or you watch Dialogue Works, you watch Nima, you watch Mario Nawfal, you watch Daniel Davis, you watch Redacted, or you watch this show, or whatever it might be. You're probably getting signals, or you've already done your own research and you know this, and you're telling other people yourself that Putin obviously is being pushed to try to attack Ukraine, to try to attack Europe. And then there's the other side of it, some of which bleeds over, which is, okay, Vladimir, you've been patient, you've been working your way west, you've got to get after Kiev and knock them out. You're going to take back the Donbass, you're going to take back Crimea, you're going to be able to reestablish control of the Crimean ports, as you already had it in agreement with the Ukrainian government, which the government, after the United States got involved, dropped that. And then, of course, sent down the Azov brigades and other Nazis to slaughter people in the Donbass in 2014. So people have been pushing for Putin to move more rapidly, right? The economy, obviously, in Russia will be further, death of 1,000 cuts harmed, even though they're making these great strides with China. You get these retaliatory movements. And yes, with drone strikes, the Ukrainians are starting to pick up that they can tactically, now learning on the tactical front, not just strategy for beforehand, but on the ground, tactically learning that if they can get the drones, they can really start to undercut the Russian ability to get out its oil and its energy, which will harm its economy. So obviously, Putin has a lot of incentive and a lot of people pushing him to say, finish it, right? At the same time, there even could be, and I'm sure, I'm not saying anything that you haven't already thought of, but I do want to make sure that I get it out here. As a person who's presenting this information, I don't want people to think that I haven't considered this either. Just to be fair on many of the dimensions on this, and I'm sure I'm missing tons, but there could be dimensions. There could be splinters inside Russia that have been not revealed yet, that are tied to European influences that actually want to prompt Putin to attack Europe. They could be that devious. Because it's very clear that the Europeans and the NATO forces want Putin to attack something in Europe. They are very, very comfortable with sacrificing some portion of geography and population coming first, obviously, to a retaliatory strike by Russia in order to leverage that as a rationale and justification for wider war. So I would not put it past the Europeans and NATO and the CIA in particular, and possibly MI6, to still have plants inside Russia that will be pushing either vocally in the media or within the government, and have not been revealed yet, to be working subtly for the European influence, which is that they want Putin to hit something in Europe. And maybe that's the scriptwriter in me, but I can see that they would put these parasites in there to try to dig away at things, and they would leave them there. Let's get your thoughts on this, and then we'll go back to the RT coverage and see what you've got to say, everybody. Let's see. We're going to scroll down a little bit. A lot of comments. A lot of great comments, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Angelo, this is from a while before. He says, if Iran is getting that nuke, hurry up. Bring on Mad Max time. I'm over this nightmare. Yeah, that's right. We can hang out with those people who have the oil. 2 days back, I saw rigged at all that tanker. You want to get out of here? You talk to me. Yeah. And Kuda Bing says, I agree with your perspective, Guard. Yeah. And again, you know, I hate to say this as a possible excuse, but, you know, I'm get this another weird headache on the right side this time. So I hope I'm thinking this through with enough syllogisms and I'm making enough sense that I'm offering myself the opportunity to try to make as many possible vector considerations as possible. Spirit of the Age says, I've heard that a lot of pressure is on Putin to strike Europe. Right. But the loudest voices are calling for Putin to finish off Ukraine and be done with it. Yeah. And I think you said that before I was bringing this up. Europe is infested with death cultists, says Front Porch Media. Death cultists running things. They are scared, dangerous chickens. Skunk Hollow says, I'm thinking about running brakeless on my BMX. Taking it risky, brother. Just put the cards in there, you know, make that sound. That's the way to do it. This is crazy stuff, and it gets crazier. I thought RT, again, just laudable coverage from RT. And there's what's going on the screen, everybody. We're going to get back to, of course, the straitjacket in a little while. But right now we're on number 2, Ukraine devastating terror attack. Going to go back to my news notes for the genetically superior and get some more of this as their guest. Of course, he's always great. Here we go.
To Dimitri Laskaris, lawyer, journalist, and host of A Reason to Resist. Welcome to the program, sir. Now, several people were killed and dozens wounded in this Ukrainian strike on a school. What's your reaction to the attack?
Well, first of all, my heartfelt sympathies go out to the victims of this attack and their families. It was gut-wrenching to watch your report just now, your correspondence report, because it reminded me very much of what I saw when I was in Minab in the south of Iran in March when the bombs were falling on Iran. And that, of course, was the site of the mass murder of 168 children and school teachers by the United States government, which struck this facility with multiple Tomahawk missiles. So this is not new. The United States and its vassals and proxies have, over the past several years, embarked on a campaign of terror against children, against schools, universities, not just in Ukraine, but also and in the territories like Luhansk that the Russian Federation has annexed. This is also happening in West Asia on a massive scale. And what I find particular, this would be appalling, of course, under any circumstances, but what I find particularly troubling is that this terrorist act happened 2 days after President Putin met with President Xi in China and declared jointly that the world was descending into the law of the jungle again. It's very hard not to infer from the timing of this terrorist act, that this was intended to be the West's response, arguably, to the joint position taken by the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China towards the utter degradation of international law. And that response is escalation. They're escalating. And and this is happening hot on the heels of this massive attack that occurred on Moscow, which struck a number of residential buildings and killed civilians as well. Is extraordinarily troubling, and it seems as though the West is inviting Russia, encouraging Russia, provoking Russia to retaliate by striking a NATO country. It's hard not to believe that that's their intention. The timing is extraordinarily suspicious in my view.
It does seem, frankly, that they're poking the bear, if you could say that. And Vladimir Putin says the strike was not accidental either. It occurred in 3 waves, 16 drones targeting the same location, a school. What does that tell us about the nature of this attack?
Well, by the way, I've seen many destroyed residential civilian infrastructure in the course of my work over the last 2.5 years in occupied Palestine, Lebanon, Iran. And I don't believe for one second that the only weapons used on that school, based on the footage that I just saw, were drones, especially that crater. But you can also see collapsed, walls, concrete walls, pillars. So it does very much appear, based on the footage that you just aired, that there were a combination of weapons used and that they were fired in waves, which supports the thesis that this was intentionally struck, intentionally destroyed. This was not an accident. And given the intelligence gathering capabilities that the West has, which they are sharing with Ukraine, it's impossible to believe that they didn't understand that this was a dormitory. This would have been easily ascertainable with the sophisticated intelligence gathering capabilities of NATO. So I would agree with completely with the assessment that this was intentionally done. They knew they were striking a dormitory. They knew they were going to kill children. And then the question arises, why? And why did they do this now? And I think, as I say, I don't want to repeat myself, but the fact that this happened in such close proximity to this historic meeting between President Putin and President Xi should be deeply concerning to us all. What message was intended to be sent by this terrorist act?
At the same time, Zelensky released footage of him meeting with students today, but at another college, talking and smiling. Briefly, if you may, sir, what do you think about him doing that while at the same time conducting such a horrific attack on that dormitory?
Well, as appalling as it is, I'm not at all surprised. This is the man who, proudly declared that he wanted Ukraine to become a big Israel, as Israel was carrying out a genocide against Palestinian children and other civilians. So it's not surprising, but it nonetheless, I think, is a very clear statement about the quality of the leadership in Ukraine. This is a terrorist regime, but it is backed, and I cannot stress this enough, and it saddens me have to say this as somebody who lives in the West, who comes from the West. It is backed by even more powerful and ruthless terrorist regimes, primarily the terrorist regime in Washington. Let's be very clear about that. And I really don't know why anyone would think at this stage that you can negotiate with these people. I don't think you can. Donald Trump came into the White House after having run on a campaign of wanting to end the war in Ukraine. He even boasted that he could do it within 24 hours. They're not even pretending to be negotiating anymore, the Americans. They are behind all of this at the end of the day, even more so than the Europeans. And I think that this is an extraordinarily powerful commentary on this horrible terrorist attack, on what kind of people we're dealing with in Washington. They have no interest in peace. They have no interest in coexistence, cooperation. And unfortunately, they seem to only understand the language of force.
All right. Dimitri Laskaris, lawyer, journalist, and host of Reason to Resist. Thank you for finding the time and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
All right. Excellent opportunity. Perfect spot to break there after Dimitri's appearance and get more comments up on the screen over at Rumble. And if you want your comments seen on the screen, you can drop them over at X or at Rumble. And saw some great ones over there just a little bit earlier. Spirit of the Age says, like I said before, it looks like Ukraine is getting their targeting intel from Israel. Front Porch Media says Israel, EU are dark cousin working to get the globe at war. Spirit of the Age says, no doubt. Front Porch Media says, you cannot negotiate with these people. And I got to say, you guys, I've been going back and forth on this today, trying not to get too cynical, or not cynical, but too dispirited or too dark and prognostication filled to start to say, this is not going to end well. There's going to be a major world war kinetically everywhere. But it does not look good after this with this Ukrainian attack. And, it's oftentimes, I think the one thing that does bolster me in a way, after looking at all this tragedy and destruction and bodies, carrying bodies out, the one thing that tends to happen, sadly, but also in a way, there's the silver lining, which is these terrible things happen. Many of us probably feel that foreboding feeling of doom, and then things sort of calm down for a little while. That's not necessarily great, but it's not as bad as it could be, I suppose, right? So, all right, continuing. I'm going to go back because now we're going to go back over into the Middle Eastern aspect of this as we start to think about the United States with no rules regarding Iran.
As the rescue operations are underway, we'll be providing you all the updates. And over at RT.com, we've got up to the minute reporting with all the latest details. It was a tragedy right at the start of the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, which we've just mentioned with our guest, and which sent shockwaves around the world. A girls' elementary school located in Minab was hit in a strike, leaving more than 170 people dead, most of them children. Despite mounting evidence of U.S. responsibility, officials in Washington have avoided taking the blame. Now, 3 months on, RT Saman Kajuri visited what's left of the school and filed this exclusive report.
I'm now walking through the ruins of what was once an ordinary girls' elementary school here in Minab, south of Iran. A school where Iranian authorities say that 170 little schoolgirls and teachers were killed during the February 28 strikes carried out by the United States and Israel against Iran. What remains today is a landscape of broken classrooms and collapsed structures, where walls have folded into themselves and entire sections of the building have been reduced to rubble. Well, the layout of the school is still faintly traceable in places, but the sense of order that once defined it has been completely erased, replaced by layers of destruction that stretch across what used to be courtyards and learning spaces. As we move through the site, the scale of impact becomes much more clear, not just in what's been destroyed, but in how abruptly normal life here was interrupted, leaving behind space frozen in the aftermath of the strike. More than 80 days later, the silence here remains heavy and unbroken, as residents describe the site as one of the most haunting reminders of the conflict in Iran. Here on the school grounds, an exhibition has been set up to display belongings recovered from girls' elementary school following the February 28 strikes by the United States and Israel against Iran. As you can see behind me, there are burned school backpacks, damaged elementary textbooks, notebooks covered in ash and dust, and small shoes belonging to some of the students killed in the attack. Well, unfortunately, the burned backpacks recovered from school have now become powerful symbols of the tragedy that unfolded here in Minab, representing the lives of children whose ordinary school day ended in devastation during the strikes. Organizers say the items were collected directly from the rubble in the aftermath of the attack and are now being preserved both as memorial objects and part of a wider effort to document what happened here. For many visitors, well, the exhibition has become one of the most emotionally difficult parts of the story. Ordinary school items, once carried daily by children, now displayed in silence as reminders of lives abruptly interrupted by the war. Today here in Minab, families of victims, surviving teachers, lawyers, Iranian officials, and public figures have gathered for an event focused on the legal follow-up surrounding the February 28 strikes. Families of victims continue demanding answers over why Israel became the target of a repeated missile attack.
May they experience the same. All of you who are involved in this are criminals, and you must be brought to trial. You must answer for the blood of these people, and we will never surrender until we avenge their blood.
All right. So now let's think about Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard didn't resign after that. I think that's all you need to know.